yourself. Thank you for doing this.
Yeah.
I totally put you on the spot. So that's great. You're like, yeah, we're down. We're having a tenants union meeting. We're trying to have a tenants union meeting, and it turned into this interview. So here we are.
Rolling with it. I got some cherries, some fun.
That's true. All right. So introduce yourself. Tell us who you are.
Rohit. I used to live in Astoria. Now I'm in Crown Heights.
We're all very sad.
Organizing Crown Heights Tenants Union. So a housing lawyer at Legal Aid. But when I was in Astoria, I worked with the Astoria Tenants Union after they were formed.
Nice, great. So what brought you to do it? Like, why did you do housing law? What brought you into the hardest thing in the history of New York City?
I had always been interested in, housing, because I partially grew up in New York City when I was a little kid, in Bay Ridge, Bensonhurst area, then Jackson Heights, and then back in Brooklyn. But we always lived in the big rent stabilized apartment back then, and then some of my other family as well, from India, and then, but it wasn't always I think the best housing conditions. But we also had no idea, nobody knew what rent stabilized was back then. For immigrants and even first generation, it's don't really know what an impact is. I know, I definitely knew my family didn't know, you have a lease for life when you're rent stabilized, and they can't jack up the rent. So I think housing had always been a part of that. I used to do some organizing, and when I decided I'd go to law school, I was I think I'm going to do it for housing, and just because housing has always been a big part of it. I kind of fell into housing organizing many years ago, 5-6 years ago, through another friend, and I've just been.
You're stuck.
Yeah, it's been here for 5 years. Yeah, I'm really stuck now. I can't go anywhere else.
You're I'm in Brooklyn now, and I'm I don't care. Yeah. Tenants union.
Yeah. But it's funny to so close to my heart. I still want to work with it in some kind of way.
Of course.
Here I am.
And I feel any New Yorker, right, who's just in New York, born and raised, you have some housing is always on your mind.
Yeah, absolutely. Especially, I think, from a little kid to now, because it's just been a way, I think, huge difference in the past 20, 25 years.
So what do you see? What is this difference?
Oh, it's way more luxury buildings. I don't, I'm sure neither of us saw luxury buildings in, Bay Ridge, Jackson Heights, or Astoria.
No.
This wasn't a thing. It was I think rents were still hard to pay and expensive, but it wasn't astronomical, and it wasn't also landlords were not these huge LLCs, at least not back then. So it was just a huge different landscape. Now, I think it's I don't think my family would be able to get an apartment now if they first came to this country. There's no way. Competing against the yuppies and everyone else. So much. I think the major difference is it's not really friendly. The city's no longer really friendly for working class families anymore. Unless you're locked into an apartment.
And you've been there forever.
Yeah, exactly.
Or you get really lucky and you fall into an apartment that's rent stabilized.
Right.
It's almost impossible for you to navigate.
Yeah.
It's very difficult.
Super tough.
Yeah. And so you obviously are doing this work every single day. You're working with clients and tenants every single day. As a lawyer, what are some of the things that you see, especially in Queens, right? Your work is all in Queens.
Yeah.
What are some of the challenges you talked to me earlier about, especially the remnants of the pandemic on working people?
Yeah, I think a lot of jobs in outer parts of Queens that are certain hotels, restaurants, those kind of jobs are just not going back, and a lot of especially immigrant families they work in restaurants in some kind of way, or they work in Manhattan, where it's their clientele is office workers that are not coming back, so they're just the vendors are still not making much money. And so it's a lot of these service jobs of construction, which isn't really growing as much right now. A lot of these jobs haven't come back, and they're not going to come back. And now it's these are tenants that are just facing non-payments just because they can't find a job.
So what advice, so say someone is a tenant and they're dealing with, the challenges of the current housing crisis, what is something that you're telling the tenants that you work with regularly that is good advice that you think someone should know? I
think they just really need to push the boundaries of what they can do. They can I don't think it's bad to reach out for them to reach out to politicians and lawyers, but at the end of the day, they're gonna have to organize to survive. They're gonna have to remember at the height of 2020 when all these buildings were going on rent strikes and people were openly saying I cannot pay and I'm not gonna pay, so I'm not gonna leave. I think that kind of organizing just needs to happen in buildings so they can just live there longer, or at least get some kind of deal or some kind of protection out of it. But I think just sitting quietly, like nothing good will happen out of that.
Like we have to make noise. I think the point that you make that is so important here is that even though like a lot of people talk about the pandemic almost in a past tense, or like the pandemic is over, for a lot of working class people that's not the case at all, right?
Yeah,
life has not gone back to normal. People are not making the salaries that they were making.
Yeah, definitely not. It's like, if you're like a white office worker, I think in some ways you're probably jolly and happy, like, oh, everything is great. But like, you know, if you work like outside a building of like Herald Square as a vendor, and like those office workers aren't coming back, like a lot of those workers are getting decimated. Like taxi drivers still aren't doing that great. Like a lot of these jobs and places are just not doing so well. Just because of the
people aren't able to pay. They're just literally not able to pay.
Yeah, and it's like even when they do work, like they work in shitty working conditions and have to risk catching COVID, or like sometimes they work through COVID now as well. Like a lot of these service sector jobs, like they don't give like pay time off if you get sick. Like,
so what are you fighting for when you go to court? Like, are you asking for more time? Are you? Yeah,
I'm not really fighting. There's not much to fight with, just because if you don't have any money, you know, I just kind of fight to drag it out, see if they may be eligible for a voucher. But it's really about it, or it's time to move. Like, it's
like very basic.
Yeah.
And so, are you seeing a lot of people getting evicted?
Yeah, I think way more than before, especially I think in outer parts of Queens, like Jamaica and those kind of areas where like there's not really rent stabilized buildings, but those areas used to be like historically more affordable. So even if it was market rate, like people could afford it. But now that the rents are skyrocketing, I think a lot of those landlords are like, fuck this. Like if the yuppies are coming here, like
I'd rather living in Jamaica.
That's what I mean. Like I think that's how these landlords are thinking. Like they're like saying like the rent's now $3,000 instead of like $1,800. Like they're really anticipating like.
So even though the movement hasn't happened yet, they're anticipating that the movement will happen.
Yeah, like they're just really getting ready for this, or they just genuinely think people will somehow pay this.
And that's why coalition building across not just the borough but also across all of New York City is so important.
Yeah, like we are always kind of just divided or in our own little worlds, but it's like all of these issues affect us,
right? And
it's like we really need a more citywide approach.
Absolutely. Okay, so you're in 2 tenants unions. What's up? That's like double the trouble. So tell me, what is a tenants union?
Tenants union is basically a collective of tenants and sometimes tenant associations. Of like a tenant association is like a group of tenants from a building that are organizing. So you can think of it as like a mini union. So it's like a mini unions of the building, and then they represent the major union, if that makes sense. So if there's like 10 small little tenant unions in all the buildings, those 10 small little buildings would then become a tenants union citywide or borough-wide or whatever you want. So in Crown Heights, we have I think we're organizing maybe 10 different buildings. So that could be a few hundred tenants that are affiliated with CHTU in some kind of way. Really the main, I think, reason is we can't win just one-on-one. And a lot of these issues affect us, so it's we kind of all work together. Kind of like how you have major unions like AFL and SIU. Right. You have a smaller little locals, but they are a big part of something bigger. And it's the big union that has the huge fights, and we kind of have it the same way. We organize against the statewide stuff, citywide stuff. But I think we just pack more of a punch
when you're not alone.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So if you're an individual as a tenant living in a building where there's a challenge that you're dealing with, the water's cut off, right?
Yeah.
And you're in a tenants union, that's you going by yourself to the landlord, or to now, not the landlord, an LLC that's obscure, or a hedge fund that's obscure, versus you going as an entire building,
right?
Basically as a tenants union.
Advocate. Or a common thing within a tenants union is some landlords now own hundreds of buildings, so you and I might live in Astoria with the same landlord. We have no idea who each other is.
Look it up.
And then I'm I'm dealing with my piece of shit landlord, and these repairs, Rana's dealing with it as well. Maybe our building should work together. And there are some buildings in CHD where the tenants will get to know each other and try to figure out how they can do cross-cut pressures against the landlord.
Great, that's powerful. Are there any examples that you have seen in your own work?
Yeah, I don't know if I'm supposed to name it because the campaign is still semi-new against a particular landlord.
Okay, so maybe not.
I don't know.
I'm go in that campaign.
I know, yeah, but it's a particular landlord. It's a huge LLC. But I think it's he's got a huge portfolio, and we're slowly organizing like I think like 4 or 5 of his different buildings. Now one of the TA meetings, like tenants from a building like 20 minutes away came by. They're like, hey, these are the issues we're dealing with. I think some of the ideas is like if they could do like a rent strike across the portfolio, could be a really huge hit.
So not just one building.
Yeah, exactly.
Good. Yeah, and so if someone's maybe like in a neighborhood where there isn't a tenants union, or in a community where there's not a tenants union, how do you get started?
Honestly, I have no idea. Like, that's really the problem.
You get to know your neighbors.
Yeah, like you get to know your neighbor. Like from
how did you get started? How did you join your tenants union? You just like showed up.
I think mine was like 5-6 years ago. With I forget how. I don't remember exactly how I got started.
Got it.
It was just through a friend that was in Richmond Tenants Union.
So relationships.
Yeah, relationships.
So you need friends.
Yeah. Definitely get as many friends as you can.
Make as many friends as you can.
Yeah, but like if you live in a big building, I would just say start talking to your neighbors.
Absolutely.
Like making small talk, sometimes helping each other get packages, looking out, and then like if something serious happens,
right,
like you can kind of do it, and then you start talking to each other.
Sounds good. My last thing is like, if you were to just like assess currently what's happening, at a like macro level, with the housing crisis in New York City, because it's like it feels so overwhelming, right?
Yeah,
the median rent is $5,000.
I know. Yeah,
you're seeing these statistics. What the hell is happening?
It's just getting like so bad. Like it's just getting more and more commodified. Like these landlords are now just like these hedge fund companies on Wall Street. Like they just have a different way of like thinking about money completely. Like I think even if it's 5,000 and no one rents it out for a year, like they don't give a shit. Like they think this is the value, and they'll just let it stay empty.
Because it's how they store their money.
Yeah, exactly. Since the recession, like they just gobble these up and see it as like safe investments.
All right. Well, what gives you hope? Because I need some hope.
I think it's like of all the years I've been doing this, it's like one I think about is like the deck is always stacked against us, right? Like many of us are marginalized, many of us work 40 plus hours, often we're undocumented against like these like often usually rich white LLC billionaires. Like they just have a lot more money and power, and so but we still put up a good fight despite the fact that they have a lot more resources than us. I think that's pretty impressive. And I think like we've gotten some really good victories. Like we got like the rent reforms in 2019. Like it used to be before 2019, you could take an apartment out of rent stabilization. But now that shit is fucking locked in pretty much for life now. Like, and that was like
huge.
Yeah, and
it's
like
huge.
And that was like I remember like being in like I think I wasn't in Albany when it got passed, but I was there before, and like I remember like it passed overnight. Like it was like I think it literally passed like 1 a.m, and they were like this law kicks in immediately now.
Amazing.
Yeah, like that, like the eviction moratorium, like shutting down the courts, making sure people didn't get evicted for years, I think is like a really huge victory we had, especially compared to cities and states that just had no moratoriums really at all, or like a 2-week moratorium. Like I think like compared to like how tough our enemies are and like how little resources we have, it's still impressive the victories we have.
I agree. That's very hopeful. Thank you so much. All right, good. So now we gotta go organize the Astoria Tenants.
I know, we gotta organize every fucking renter
We
here.
really do. We really
Yeah.
do. We don't have time. So yeah. But thank you. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, of course.